Welcome inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams. This week, we speak with the author of a new graphic novel about the West Virginia Mine Wars, a labor struggle that culminated in the largest armed uprising since the Civil War.
My wife regularly jokes that I haven't shut up about the West Virginia Mine Wars since she met me. It was something that, like, anybody showed them any interest, I'd go on a nice long story about the West Virginia Mine Wars.
Also, a professional storyteller invents quirky characters, like a sign maker who can't spell. They're drawn from small town life.
In a small town, everybody finds their place, and you don't have to be perfect, but if your community supports you, you can still get a really positive reaction or experience out of it.
And one of the most common animals to get hit by cars are possums. But there's a kind of animal rescue called pouch picking.
There are people out there who go around and check possum carcasses on the road to see if there are babies in the pouch, because the babies can live a little bit of extra time.
You'll hear these stories and more this week inside Appalachia. Welcome inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams. The West Virginia Mine Wars are an important but little-known piece of American history. They happened in the early 1900s. Coal miners in southern West Virginia had been trying to organize a union, while coal companies tried to stop them. Strikes and violent clashes ensued, culminating in the Battle of Blair Mountain in 1921. More than a century later, there's a newfound interest in that history, including a version of the story in a graphic novel. It's called Black Coal and Red Bandanas, an illustrated history of the West Virginia Mine Wars. It's written by Raymond Tyler, who grew up in Hall County in North Georgia. Raymond Tyler, thank you so much for coming on Inside Appalachia to speak with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, brother.
What was your gateway into comics?
My gateway into comics was, I don't ever remember a time not reading them. I fell in love with them from the moment that I looked at them. We would get the newspaper and I would go and I would look at the funnies immediately. And I just loved them. I was so lucky that there was a town over had a comic book store. I think the first time I went in that comic book store, I had to be like 4. And I'd usually walk out with one comic from the 25-cent bin that they would have there. And I never stopped reading them, always loved them. By the time I was 14 years old, I said I wanted to write comics as a living. So that's how much I loved those books. So, yeah.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. I'm 47. And I did the same thing with the comic strips. And a lot of my initial understanding of politics was shaped by Doonesbury and Bloom County. So,
what's funny is the thing that got me into like politics in general, like political literature in general, was comics. It was the work of Alan Moore that I discovered when I was 14 years old. I read one of his books and I did not understand it. The book was Watchmen, actually. I'd read Watchmen. And then I went online and I looked up who is Alan Moore. I read that he is an anarchist. What that means, I don't know anything. But whatever it was, he wrote one of the most confusing books to me ever. Like, as far as like these superheroes weren't good guys. I was very confused. I was very upset by the ending, so much that I went back to the comic book shop and I was like, where's the rest of the book? I didn't understand what the book ended that way, right? I just didn't have that frame of, that I was thinking about things, but, it was so new. And so that got me into reading radical authors. Actually, that was a gateway to radical authors and alternative comic books.
when did you first become aware of the concept of Appalachia and that you had grown up in part of it?
That would have been when I started to travel around a little bit. I started to see the difference in the culture that I grew up in. And I guess everybody has this probably who grew up in Appalachia. Is you don't really, is you might think about it, you might know it, but I don't know if you realize how special or unique it is until you go to other places. I went to Goddard College in Vermont. It's an alternative college. It was very like counterculture in the 60s and the 70s, and it's still counterculture. Everybody who goes to Goddard College has to study social justice. It's part of the thing. And it was actually there that I started to realize a little bit more about the Appalachian identity, because it was a teacher at Goddard College who was like, you should write about that. You should talk, you should, think a little bit more about your Appalachian background and how that pertains to you as a writer. When you're growing up in the mountains, you don't really think too much about it until you leave.
How did you learn about the West Virginia Mine Wars?
I've always been a big movie buff, right? I've always just loved movies. So, of course, I had seen the movie Matewan by John Sayles, but I think it was actually in college, like undergrad, and it being in Vermont, that I started to read everything I could about Appalachia, like we were talking about before, of like, well, what about, where you're from? And that story just really took hold and became a special interest from there. My wife regularly jokes that I haven't shut up about the West Virginia Mine Wars since she, met me. It was something that, like, if anybody showed them any interest, it would just be I would go on a nice long story about the West Virginia Mine Wars, because it was just something that was infinitely interesting to me. I'd been to West Virginia so many times growing up, and it's one of the most beautiful states, right? I love West Virginia. There's something that's always struck me as a kid when we were driving through West Virginia, of the mixture of like the industrial with the beautiful, just majestic mountains. And that imagery has always stuck in my head. So I think that was a big contributing factor to the special interest of West Virginia.
Would you mind reading an excerpt?
Yeah. So I'll read from the last little bit of the book. This scene takes place after the Battle of Blair Mountain and after the bombing that occurs in West Virginia. The struggle is long. We're going up against a vicious system. Each act of resistance shakes, weakens the structures of oppression. But most times, those acts of resistance aren't enough to bring down the entire structure. The Battle of Blair Mountain was the largest labor uprising in United States history and the largest armed uprising since the American Civil War. At its core, the revolt was a direct challenge to the inhumane structures of industrial power. There is a hidden history in the U.S. It is the history of ordinary people standing up to fight the injustice of a capitalist system that is willing to use extraordinary violence to protect profits. These mountains and these folks are beautiful, but if the capitalists could make $1 off of it, they'd level these hills and all the people with it.
One thing I like about this book is the note in it encouraging that once the reader is finished, don't just stick it on a shelf, but to pass it on to someone else to read.
Yes.
Who did you write this comic for?
The simple answer would be, I genuinely think it's for anybody who is interested in history from below and people who are struggling against oppressive systems. But this book is really a love letter to Appalachia and Appalachian resistance. And my hope with the book is that after people read it, if they pass it on to somebody who might be interested in it, definitely less concerned. And I mean this genuinely, about selling books and more the book being shared. I've always thought of comics as an almost folk literature where, you take comics and, when you're a kid and you share them with other people. Right. I don't know if you ever remember doing that, trading comics with people in the neighborhood, but I think adults can still do that too, because this comic is for, anybody can read this book. I think that would be 12 and up. I don't think there's anything in this. We even censor some language in the book so that kids could read it. But the audience for it is, it is mostly adults who are reading this book right now. My hope with this book is that it could kind of be some sort of a continuing like a folk tradition of handing this book to somebody who might be interested in these histories of Appalachian people.
One thing I like about it is the treatment of Mother Jones, who many labor writers mythologize Mother Jones, understandably. But there is a pivotal scene in this book that kind of subverts that and shows the reality on the ground and what it meant for the people who were involved in this struggle. I appreciated that moment. What is this book about a conflict more than 100 years ago have to tell us about the moment we're living in now?
So the thing I think is important about this book and kind of about all labor history books is, the things that we have that we like in our lives today that make our lives somewhat comfortable, and the key word is somewhat, come from a lot of people who have struggled for us. And that struggle isn't over. The reason that we have the weekend is because of labor struggles. The reason that we have any sort of comfort that we have in our lives today, the reason that private, militias don't gun us down when we're on strikes is because of so many people who have fought before us. Now they do other things, right, that are bad. And let's hope we never go back to a time in which private militias are, hurting people who are trying to fight for a better life. And I mean that like with a sense of urgency. Let's hope that we never go back to that time, and we keep organizing to make sure that the rights we have aren't taken away, and that we can continue in this class struggle for freedom.
That was Raymond Tyler. His new graphic novel is Black Coal and Red Bandanas, an illustrated history of the West Virginia Mine Wars. It's available now from PM Press. Appalachia is known for its storytelling traditions. Cherokee legends, prayers and sermons in mountain churches, joke-telling. James Froemel's journey into storytelling has taken a lifetime. From reciting Emily Dickinson in 6th grade to winning the Vandalia Gathering's Liars competition in West Virginia. Froemel recently worked with storyteller, author, and Liars competition champ Bill Lepp to hone his craft. Folkways reporter Margaret McLeod-Leaf spoke with Froemel about telling tales from the stage.
So what is a liar's tale, and what is the liar's contest?
So the Liars Contest it's a contest that happens every year at the Vandalia Gathering. It's a time when anybody can come out and they can tell a tale. So it's this really great, in that folk life tradition of making these art forms accessible. Just show up, you sign your name on a piece of paper, and then they call you up and you tell your tale. So you're presenting something fantastic as though it were true. Most tales are told first person. And oftentimes they'll start off with something really believable. When I listen to Bill's tales, you always try and figure out, okay, well, where does the lie start? And I know for my own, I have some tales that are closer to true life, and I have some tales where everything's made up. People go, I believed you up until this point. I said, no, as soon as I opened my mouth, I was lying to you. None of that happened.
Can you tell me more about the first time that you saw Bill perform?
So the first time I saw him live was at the Liars Contest. And Bill just had such a great way of engaging the audience. He told stories about West Virginia that were funny, that dealt with things which are culturally just true, things that you see when you're interacting with West Virginia, some of our quirks perhaps, but dealt with them in really positive ways. He was very comedic, and he also was just such a great ambassador of the state. And so I really liked seeing that combination up there.
How did you end up actually meeting him?
So we were through the West Virginia Humanities Council Folklife Apprenticeship Program. Bill and I would meet most often through Zoom. Bill is down in South Charleston. I'm here in Morgantown. And a lot of it was talking about why we tell these stories, and figured out, what was my voice within storytelling? Why was I telling stories? And what did I want to achieve out of those stories? So Bill was a really great sounding board to work with me on my stories and say, well, this is, there's a technical issue here. You kind of lost me on this thing, and I think you need a little more of this. And I would go back and rewrite and then tell the tale again, and he would give more feedback. So he was a great guy to bounce ideas off of. He's also a great laugher. Bill doesn't laugh for free. You have to earn your laughs with him. And you've got something good when you can get him going.
So you mentioned that Bill sometimes acknowledges West Virginians' quirks or Appalachians' quirks, but in a really positive way. And I wonder if you also challenge Appalachian stereotypes in your stories, and if you do, how you do that.
I talk a lot about this small town life and this, I would say, acceptance of differences in people. The one story that I worked on with Bill, we had a sign maker who was he made beautiful signs, but he was terrible at spelling, and so every sign is beautiful but misspelled. But it was really just about this idea of in a small town, everybody finds their place, and you don't have to be perfect in that place. But if your community supports you, you can still get a really positive reaction or experience out of it. So he's a wonderful sign maker. It's just that he doesn't spell very well. And so that's the kind of running gag, and it presented a lot of jokes within that one story. But that everybody in the town, no matter how different they are accepted, and that everybody is everybody's excited for anything that's happening in the town. And that's something that I loved about small town life, was the participation. That if we want a community, we all have to pitch in and make it. We have to get excited about the 4th of July festival. We have to get excited about the Main Street Parade, where we're going to get the same bubble gum thrown at us for the millionth time. We have to engage in these things.
What does it mean to you to be a storyteller? And speaking of Appalachia, a second question would be, what does it mean to you to be a storyteller in Appalachia?
It is a very minimalistic art form. To be a storyteller in Appalachia, I think, is really exciting in that it is an area where folk arts are truly appreciated. And it's an amazing experience to be in the room with people who are so talented. Within West Virginia, it's a lot of people, but a small community, if that makes sense. And that I never feel like if there's an artist in West Virginia or a performer, I don't think I've ever been more than like 2 degrees away from them. I know that guy who knows that guy. Okay, we all know each other. But I think that's common within folk arts, is that you can really go up to the greatest artist in this folk genre, and they'll take the time. If you ask them, they will take the time to show you the banjo, to show you the fiddle, to work with you, and they want to share that art. And they really take that, that folk aspect of it, that this is something that can only be passed down if we're willing to give this art to someone else. It's not, there's not a lot of formal training programs for clawhammer banjo. It's just people teaching one another this thing. And that's true of storytelling as well. It's just us really going out and showing one another how to do this thing and engaging with one another in that way.
That was storyteller James Froemel. His conversation with Margaret McLeod Leaf is part of our Folkways reporting project, which covers arts and culture in our region. You can hear Froemel's stories on our website, wvapublic.org. Coming up, a job digging coal leads to a career making wooden spoons. You're Inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams.
Support for Inside Appalachia is provided by Concord University, offering 31 bachelor-level degrees and 6 master-level degrees for students of any age. More information at concord.edu.
For 30 years, Sue and Stan Jennings have run Allegheny Trainware, a West Virginia company that makes wooden kitchen utensils. They started off as a couple of coal miners, and when they weren't underground, they talked about what else they could be doing. Last year, Folkways reporter Capri Cafaro visited the Jennings and brought us this story.
Come on in. I've just arrived at Allegheny Treenware's woodworking shop. I see one lone sign on this winding road that tells me I'm in the right place. Sue Jennings greets me with a welcoming smile and introduces me to her husband, Stan. Today, the couple is giving me a private tour of their business.
We make a spoon for you. It's part of our tour. So let's do the spoon then? We're going to go ahead and make the spoon?
Yeah, let's make the spoon.
We're going to actually make you one of our more popular items, which is a 10-inch granny spoon.
It looks like a typical wooden spoon you may find in your own grandmother's kitchen. Simple, clean lines, and durable. This one will be made of cherry wood. Each spoon starts with a pattern that is traced onto a board of wood and cut, just like a clothing pattern for fabric.
When we make the spoon or whatever, there's no duplicating machines, there's no computerized equipment. Everything is truly made by hand here at this shop.
Although Sue and Stan have learned how to make spoons through a lot of trial and error over the years, both of them can trace their passion for woodworking back to their childhood.
I was the daughter of a contractor, and so I grew up going with my father to the job all the time, and that was building homes. And I knew every tool he had. I was his gopher.
Well, I guess kind of like Sue, I had a little bit of woodworking in my DNA. My father, he had a sawmill, and he had a team of horses back then. They pulled the logs out with horses. But my grandfather, I spent a lot of time with him. He was a carpenter, and I learned a lot off of my grandfather.
When I met my husband, we were both working in the coal mines underground. And when we first started getting to know each other, the question we would ask is, if you had anything in the world you wanted to do, what would be first on your list, with your life? And I said, I wanted to be a woodworker. And he had the same dream. So right off the bat, we knew there was something pretty special there.
The chance to chase their dreams of woodworking came sooner than expected. Not long after the couple met, Sue and Stan were laid off from the mines.
We all walked in and got our pink slips, and that was the end of our coal mining business, and that's how this evolved, because we needed a way to make a living.
To make ends meet, the couple started selling odds and ends at craft shows. During that time, both experimented with making spoons. Stan says the first set of spoons he made were less than impressive, but were created from the heart, and because he needed a cheap present.
I suppose I was too tight to buy a Christmas gift. But anyway, I made her a set of dogwood spoons. And that was actually the first set of spoons we made. I'm ashamed to even show people. They turned out so bad, but Sue hung on to them.
Yeah, I still got them. They're pretty precious. And they are a little clubby, in feel, but they're made out of dogwood, and it was my Christmas gift. So, heck yeah, I'm proud of them. The first spoon I made was a set of measuring spoons. And I made it out of rhododendron. And that's because we had gone to a show, and we met a spoon maker, and we talked about him. I was fascinated from the very beginning. And on the way home from that show, I said, what would be cool would be make some measuring spoons.
Sue and Stan discovered there was a whole culture around wooden utensils when they stumbled upon an old book called Treen. This book ended up changing the direction of their business, but they almost didn't buy it.
At the time, it was like a $50 book, and we stood there and agonized over spending $50 on this book because we couldn't afford a book for $50.
Treen is a Saxon word that refers to wooden items made from the tree for use in the kitchen or dairy. After buying the book, Allegheny Treenware was born. Much of the inspiration for their product design and the name of their business has come from the Treen book. Today, over 30 years later, the book is still on their shelves. It's thick and well-worn, filled with photos of wooden kitchen items. I can see the design connection between what's in the book and what Sue and Stan make today, both functional and beautiful. Over the years, the couple has grown as craftspeople thanks to a combination of grit and learning from other woodworkers. Now times are not as tight, and the process is much more sophisticated. They now have several employees and a workshop full of high-end equipment. Their Treenware is sold online all around the world, and the spoons are coveted collector's items. Today, there's a lot of action on the shop floor. Staff shift between workstations. Each is dedicated to a specific purpose. Sue introduces me to her team member Chris, who is working on the bandsaw. He's beginning to shape the spoon.
He's got the spoon cut out already. So all he's going to do is he's going to flip it up on its side, and he's going to carve the curve in the head and the curve in the handle. We've got some shape now.
Next, Chris takes the spoon to the milling machine where he's going to trim and smooth the wood, a process called routing. But Sue and Stan reserve the most difficult part of the process for themselves, the shaping finish of the spoon. This requires very coarse sandpaper on a spinning belt, which can cut your hands if you're not careful.
So what he's doing right now, he's shaping the head of the spoon. He's going to make it symmetrical on all sides. And then he'll come over to the disc, and he's going to start removing any excess wood he can on the disc.
Sue says her approach to shaping is different from Stan's. She pre-shapes the spoon first, while Stan starts by planning things out before he sits down at a machine.
We're different sides of the brain, and we go about things differently. He's very methodical, and I'm not, but we end up in the same place.
Sue and Stan also have complementary skills as business partners, especially when they were selling at craft shows.
I'm always at the booth selling, and his job was to entertain. And he would do that. He'd be hand carving a spoon, and he'd be telling stories, entertaining the men while the women went shopping. It worked perfectly.
Before I get to take the spoon they made for me, they put some finishing touches on it. They burn their initials, S.J., into the spoon and then soak it in food-grade oil to bring out the color of the cherry wood. Now I get a spoon of my very own.
So there it is. Oh my God. Now you're going home with this. That's your spoon.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This spoon is much more than a wooden utensil. It represents the sweat equity of one couple who stayed true to their dreams and each other for over 3 decades. In Preston County, West Virginia, I'm Capri Cafaro for Inside Appalachia.
In 2024, the Tennessee Department of Correction changed its policy about who is allowed to mail books to prisoners. The revised rule means that nonprofits who've sent free books to prisoners for more than 50 years can't serve Tennessee anymore. WPLN's Char Daston brings us this story.
The Appalachian Prison Book Project, or APBP, lives in an old stone house in Morgantown, West Virginia. It sends free books to prisoners in 6 states. Lydia Welker, the communications coordinator, explains how it works.
We get about 200 letters a week from people incarcerated asking for books that they like to read. They might ask us for a certain author or a genre or a specific title that they want.
Then volunteers check their supply of donated books and try to send the best possible match. State prison systems have strict standards about who can mail books to prisoners. So the nonprofit and others like it work with each state to get on the list of trusted book vendors. APBP has been approved by Tennessee for years. Sometimes a book will still be rejected and returned.
Books with nudity in them, even art statues like Michelangelo's David.
But Welker says one day last April, something unusual started happening to the books they were sending to Tennessee.
We got 4 tote bags worth of books returned from state prisons in Tennessee that same day.
That was all of them. They soon figured out why so many books were being rejected. The Tennessee Department of Correction, or TDOC, had taken it off the list of approved vendors. And the same thing happened to all the other Books to Prisons programs that serve Tennessee. Now, a prisoner who wants a certain book has to buy it, or get someone else to buy it, new, directly from just a few authorized online booksellers and publishers. A spokesperson for TDOC told me the change was made, quote, to mitigate the introduction of contraband through mail. But researchers have found that paper mail accounts for less than 2% of contraband in prisons. Kelly Brotzman directs the Prison Book Program in Massachusetts, which serves jails and prisons in all 50 states. She says this policy change will have a big side effect. It shrinks the number of prisoners who can access books to
almost nobody. Because you don't have the internet as an incarcerated person, you can't order them. Plus, you don't have any money
In Tennessee, prisoner wages range from 17 cents an hour to $1 an hour for so-called specialty jobs.
You need a loved one on the outside with both the connectivity and the disposable income to order books directly to you from one of those sources.
Prison libraries aren't usually a good option either. Moira Marquis was the lead writer of a PEN America report on censorship in prisons.
Anybody that you talk to who's inside will tell you that the number of books in a prison library is inadequate for the number of people that are there. The number of hours that they're open is inadequate. The staffing is inadequate. The titles haven't been updated in forever.
Prisoners have already seen the effects of the policy change. Brian Hurst is incarcerated at the Turney Center Industrial Complex, about an hour west of Nashville. He says he was getting free books from a church in Pegram that had to stop sending them. He also says reading in prison has changed his life. He writes, "I learned so much about myself. I learned just how vast my interests are, how many things, places, people I am curious about. I found escape, and in that escape, a newfound purpose, a drive in life I did not before possess." That kind of personal growth, Tennessee native Lorenzo Camboa Irvin says he saw it too when he was in federal prison in the 1970s. At the time, the only books allowed at all were Bibles. He helped lead a lawsuit that ended that restriction. Then, he started a political reading group.
People who had been gangsters, they started to read and they started to understand some of the economic and political injustices of society that led them to prison. And it changed their focus entirely. Instead of the use of violence to get the things that you needed in life, it allowed people to understand that there was a new possibility.
The Corrections Agency says there is another way programs can still send books, donating them to prison libraries rather than mailing them directly to prisoners. But Brotzman of the Prison Book Program in Massachusetts says that's not a reliable way to get a book to a prisoner who wants to read it. Not every prisoner has access to the library.
It is a privilege that can be taken away, and it is very frequently taken away.
How do Books to Prisons programs plan to fight back? Lawsuits are an option, but Brotzman says groups like hers fear retaliation from prison systems if they sign on as plaintiffs. So, for now, Tennessee's policy change will remain in effect, and prisoners will have far less access to the books they want.
That was Char Daston, reporting for WPLN. HIV cases have surged in parts of Appalachia, particularly in West Virginia, Eastern Kentucky, and Tennessee. Much of the spike is related to intravenous drug use and the sharing of needles that can spread the disease. Experts say that makes safe syringe programs more important than ever. WPLN health reporter Catherine Sweeney has more.
The latest data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention from 2022 shows that 14% of new cases were among people who inject drugs. There are several factors playing into that growth, says Dr. Ima Honkai, an infectious disease specialist. Substance use disorder is a continuing problem. She says the pandemic made services harder to access while taking a toll on the country's mental health. But there's also an infrastructure problem.
Making sure we have harm reduction programs widely available for those that need them is really challenging. And where we don't have those services, we see kind of the compounding effects of that.
Only about a dozen of Tennessee's 95 counties have clean syringe programs, for example. Honkai says those are critical for infectious disease prevention, and that's not just HIV and hepatitis.
A lot of skin and soft tissue infections, heart valve infections, bone infections.
It's unclear what kind of federal support syringe programs will get under the new presidential administration, but Dr. Jerome Adams, who served as the U.S. Surgeon General during Donald Trump's first term, has been a vocal supporter and has urged red states to invest in them.
West Virginia writer and humorist Laura Jackson is an avid explorer of backroads and scenic byways. Inspired by her trips, she wrote a series of essays about what she saw in her home state. They became her 2023 book, Deep and Wild, on mountains, opossums, and finding your way in West Virginia. Producer Bill Lynch spoke with Jackson about the book.
Would you like to read something?
This is from an essay called Being West Virginian. The irony of meeting a familiar face far from home is that, while we're so excited to be out of state and seeing something new, the sight of another West Virginian strikes the sweetest note. We've found someone in this wide world who understands what we're so unable to convey to the residents of the other 49 states. We don't have to explain, yes, we're from West Virginia, and yes, we have all our teeth and running water, and no, we aren't coal miners, but yes, we know plenty, and yes, it is a beautiful state. We meet each other and grasp hands and find, suddenly, more joy in our bond than we do in the vacation we took to get away from the place that connects us. It's comforting to encounter our own, because when we meet people from other places, there's a checklist of corrections we have to run through regarding our existence, and the primary topic is often geography. The conversations, vastly different from the ones we have with our mountain state brethren, inevitably go like this. Where are you from? Arizona. You? West Virginia. West Virginia? Hey, I have a cousin in Richmond. James Leonard. Sells insurance. You know him? It's always Richmond. I don't know what it is about Richmond, Virginia that is attracting your cousins, but it really must be something if they've all decided to settle there.
Tell me a little about that.
About this in particular?
Yeah, in particular.
Well, it's a thing that West Virginians know. We have 55 counties, and there's only so many cities in West Virginia. People know Huntington, people know Wheeling, people know Charleston. But an awful lot of West Virginians live in these rural areas. And I mentioned in the book there's a little town called Smoot. I've never been to Smoot. I couldn't pick Smoot on a map. But the people who know Smoot are probably just going to say, I'm from, actually, I don't even know what county Smoot is in, but they would mention the county. They would say, I'm from Mason County or I'm from Greenbrier County. And it's just easier to identify ourselves by our county of residence than it is to mention a tiny town like Smoot. And that's what we do. Where are you from? Oh, Harrison County. Where are you from? Wetzel County.
This book is a lot about your relationship with West Virginia. So how do you feel like you fit in here?
How do I feel? Wow. Well, the thing about West Virginia is at all times I think we feel like we fit in, and yet we don't fit in at all. It's such a unique place, and we have such a tremendous connection to the land and to the mountains in particular, but we all come from very distinct backgrounds. And so the things we have in common, I think, are stronger than the things we don't have in common most of the time, but it can be a challenge to reconcile those two things.
Okay. Well, how do you feel like the state fits in with the rest of the country?
Not at all. And that's a huge part of why I wrote this book. We know why we love it here. We know why we belong here. But I always say that West Virginia is kind of like a fishbowl. People are on the outside looking in going, what is going on in that fish tank? What are those fish doing? Are they happy in there? Do they feel confined? Do they feel trapped? Do they want to escape? So this book is an attempt to show the rest of the world what it's like to be a West Virginian, especially on the average day. There's a lot of narratives out there about West Virginia in the past and overcoming adversity and addiction and poverty. But this is more about what it's like to be one of us on the average day.
So your topics, how did you choose those? I mean, there are many things you could have talked about. You could have, like, the Mothman, biscuits, baby dog, hellbenders, you know?
Yeah, well, the essays arose from my experiences, a lot of which is travel around the state. You'll notice that a lot of the essays have to do with places. I'm from Wheeling, and most of the essays do not take place in Wheeling. And so I've spent an awful lot of time traveling around the state, especially with my kids, and having these new experiences. And those sparked most of the essays. And then there's also a strong ecological theme that goes through the book, too. And so I drew a lot from my experiences. I write for Wonderful West Virginia, and so I've got an awful lot of connections with the DNR and things that I've learned through those freelance writing adventures. And so that's where a lot of the ecology and the science came from.
Let's talk a little about your writing life. When did you start?
Well, I wrote a lot when I was a kid, and then I kind of drifted away because I wanted to be a scientist. And I went to school to be a marine biologist, but it turns out I'm actually really terrible at science. But I learned along the way that I'm pretty good at explaining science. I took a break when I had my kids. I was a stay-at-home mom for a long time. And then somewhere around 2014, I saw an ad for Chatham University in Pittsburgh's low residency MFA. And it was something that I could do from home. I could return to creative writing, and they have a very strong nature writing program. And I was immediately drawn to that. And while I was getting my MFA, I started doing freelance writing on the side, and it started kind of small, just a local Wheeling publication. And over time, I've made connections with other publications like Wonderful West Virginia and West Virginia Living, and it sort of took off from there. So while I was doing the freelance writing, I was also working on the book, but I didn't know I was working on a book at the time. I was just writing essays because I was also traveling. I was doing all of these things at once, and so it wasn't until probably the early part of the pandemic that I realized, wow, I've got a heck of a collection here of essays, and I should see what they look like when I stick them all together.
With the traveling, what's your favorite part of traveling around the state?
Well, my favorite part of traveling or my favorite part of the state? Because those are two distinct questions.
Well, favorite part of the state, and also, is it traveling fun? Is it fun to go from point A to, and I know that can be kind of complicated getting to point B sometimes, but is there fun in that?
There is fun for me, and I think there's a distinct difference between being the adult in the front seat who's excited about the adventure and being the 10-year-old in the back seat. My kids always hated going to Spruce Knob. They loved it when they got there, but, inevitably I had to drug them with Dramamine, and so they would miss half the trip. I've learned as I've gotten older to get off the interstate because the most wonderful things that you find in West Virginia and in the rest of the world too are off the interstate and off the map. And so I enjoy now, as a middle-aged adult, the journey as much as the destination. Some of the things you find you never expect to find, and half the time it's because you've taken a wrong turn or your GPS has led you in the wrong direction. And that's a quirk of West Virginia that I don't know if that happens other places, but our GPS will tell us to go somewhere, and suddenly we end up in a trench in Barber County. But I love that adventure and not knowing where I'm going to end up. And as far as my favorite place in the state, I grew up in Wheeling, so everyone in Wheeling tends to go to Canaan Valley, and we would ski in Canaan, and so we do the Potomac Highlands, and Pendleton has become my favorite just because the tallest places and the wildest places in the state are in Pendleton County, and my heart belongs there, I think.
On the back of your book there, the photo,
Mm-hmm.
Please tell me about the possum picture there.
Well, so that is a collection of Virginia opossums, and they are probably the number one critter that gets flattened on the roads in the United States more than any other. They're drawn to carrion in the road, and they're not super fast, and so they tend to get hit often. And there are people out there who call themselves pouch pickers who will go around and check possum carcasses on the road at certain times of the year to see if there are babies in the pouch, because the babies can live a little bit of extra time, even with their mom dead. So if the pouch pickers find these neonatal babies, they'll get them, and often if you can find someone that will raise them, they have a decent chance of survival. So my friend Heather Kalb took that picture, and she is a biologist in Wheeling, and she's known as someone who will take in these babies and raise them. And I love opossums, and I had never really met an opossum up close except when I was young and worked at a zoo. And so we went up there, and she had 4 babies. Their mother had been killed, and I believe she kept one. Eventually, the other 3 were released, but my son and I went up there to meet the possums, and they were super friendly, and they also were known to do things like go into the kitchen and help themselves to things like Cheetos and pretzels. But that was my dream come true, to be covered in opossums, and I think the opossums are catching on. I don't know if it's social media algorithms giving me what I want to see, or if possums are actually catching on, but they're becoming more and more popular, especially because they're so anxious.
The book is Deep and Wild by Laura Jackson. Laura, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Deep and Wild, On Mountains, Opossums, and Finding Your Way in West Virginia is available now from Autumn House Press. A polar vortex has dropped Arctic temperatures on Appalachia, but the last couple of winters were more mild. to the point where I was finding ticks year-round for a while. And the diseases ticks carry are a growing problem. From Eastern Kentucky, WMMT's Jack Skaggs has more.
Tick populations are changing in Appalachia, and with them the risks of tick-borne disease. Kentucky State epidemiologist Dr. Kathleen Winters says black-legged ticks, the ticks associated with Lyme disease, are on the rise in Kentucky.
There has been a steady increase in tick-borne illnesses in Kentucky and including in the Appalachian region. We've seen an increase of 125% in the Appalachian region over the last 3 years. And this is likely caused by a number of factors, both increase in awareness and reporting and diagnosis, but also increases in incidence, we think, due to reforestation efforts and deer population expansion. Tick ranges are expanding across the U.S., and we are seeing more black-legged ticks here in Kentucky than we had several decades ago. We also have better surveillance for ticks now than we did before, but we do think that there is a true increase there. We've now found the black-legged tick in over 80 counties here in Kentucky, including 36 Appalachian counties.
I spoke with Extension entomologist Jonathan Larson in the bug room at the UK Entomology Department.
There are some things that we can point to. One of them being there are more mice, seemingly. There are also more white-tailed deer now than there were in the distant past, just through a variety of conservation methods. And then we also have to contend with climatic variability. The sort of warming of things, as well as invasive plants coming in, those can pair up and create a lot more habitat, not just for the ticks, but for those hosts. And then that's going to create this bigger base population that we're going to unfortunately find on our ankles and shins when we go out to enjoy nature.
Larson says Rocky Mountain spotted fever is the leading tick disease in Kentucky. Rocky Mountain spotted fever is carried by the dog tick, but the Lone Star tick is now thought to be the most numerous tick in the state and responsible for alpha-gal syndrome, or red meat allergy.
We do have data that also supports that there's been changes in the tick populations, like what ones we're exposed to. And the big focus there has been a shift from the American dog tick, being the former champion tick here in the state, to now the Lone Star tick being the number one. The Lone Star tick is it's newer than the other species. It came about 20 or 30 years ago probably, and has since sort of taken over the number one title spot. So there is a shift that way. Probably the worst one in this state, I would say, is the dog tick, actually. They spread Rocky Mountain spotted fever. That's the number one tick-borne illness in our state. We have the most cases of it. After that, you would talk about black-legged deer tick and the Lyme cases, which have also gone up, I believe, about 58%. And then the Lone Star tick, it's less about disease and more about the allergy that they're associated with. So the red meat allergy, it's hard to call it disease vectoring because they're not moving a pathogen, right, but they move the sugar molecule around, so they're responsible for this allergy.
Dr. Winter explains more about alpha-gal.
Alpha-gal syndrome is an allergic condition, and it can be triggered in a person after they are bit by a Lone Star tick. What happens is the bite of the tick introduces a sugar molecule called alpha-gal into the bloodstream. And in some individuals, this initiates an allergy. This same sugar molecule is found in many mammal species. And so weeks to months later after the tick bite, an allergic reaction could occur if somebody eats a red meat meal, like a hamburger or a steak. They could have a very minor allergy, or they could have a serious allergic reaction.
Lawrence County, Kentucky resident Greg Caudle talks about how his life has changed with an alpha-gal diagnosis.
I had a couple tick bites on my body, didn't know that it caused a problem. Had some swelling in the area, having symptoms of a night with chest pain, itchy places all over my body, shortness of breath, and just felt tired. Just a checkup, and was telling her about some of my symptoms, and I told her about the tick bites, so she decided to send me for draw some blood to have some tests done for Lyme's, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and alpha-gal, and came back positive for alpha-gal. It's had a big impact on my life. Everything I do, everything I eat or drink right now, I have to be very cautious of what's in it, how it's made, how it's processed. So it's a real learning curve. It's had an effect. At first, I was depressed. I thought, I'm not going to be able to eat anything. I'm learning to navigate. But at first, it was kind of devastating to me. It really was. Now, everybody's a little different. You might, some people can have dairy, some can't. But you follow the guidelines of your doctor and try yourself, be very cautious, read labels. You can get through this. We just have to make the best of it.
For more information on tick-borne disease in Kentucky, visit the Kentucky Department for Public Health website at chfs.ky.gov, the CDC website at cdc.gov, or the University of Kentucky Entomology webpage at entomology.ca.uky.edu. For WMMT, I'm John Skaggs.
For more information about tick-borne diseases, visit the Centers for Disease Control at cdc.gov. Even with the cold weather this winter, it's still a good idea to keep an eye out for ticks. Till next time, thanks for joining us as we journey throughout Appalachia. Our theme music is by Matt Jackford. Other music this week was provided by Ed Snodderly, Jeff Ellis, David Mayfield Parade, Dinosaur Burps, Kaya Cater, Steve Earle, Sean Watkins, and Blue Dot Sessions. Bill Lynch is our producer. Abby Neff is our associate producer. Our executive producer is Eric Douglas. Kelly Libby is our editor. Our audio mixer is Patrick Stevens. We had help this week from Folkways editor Nicole Musgrave. You can find us on Instagram @InAppalachia. You can also send us an email to insideappalachia@wvpublic.org. Visit wvpublic.org/InsideAppalachia to subscribe or stream all of our stories. Or look for Inside Appalachia on your favorite podcast app. Inside Appalachia is a production of West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Support for Inside Appalachia is provided by Concord University, focusing on students' futures. Classes available at concord.edu/apply.